What up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 16, a regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thing. As usual, we've got Corbett joining us tonight. Corbett, how are you doing, friend?
What's up, Meowth? How are you going today?
I'm doing pretty well. So guys, it's been a while since we've done like a normal episode, and so just in case you've forgotten, we're planning on doing three things during today's episode. First of all, we're going to talk about the State of the Wild metagame, so what's dominating, how to beat it, and any decks that might be flying underneath the radar. Second off, we're going to be talking about any wild news, controversial topics, or maybe the lack thereof. And then last but not least, we're going to be talking about our decks of the week. But before we get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy content like this. It's free and it supports us a lot. All right, let's go to get started. So yeah, it's been about 2 weeks now, about a week and a half since we've had Guardian Animals and Tortolan Pilgrim nerfed. Guardian Animals went from 7 to 8. Tortolan now goes from casting from your deck rather than a copy. So Turtle Mage is dead. F's in the comments for Turtle Mage. It died too soon. But Tortolan Pilgrim is still a very, very, very good card in Luna's Pocket Galaxy Reno Mage. I can confirm. A lot of people can confirm that. But now, like, proactive Druid decks outside of Aggro Druid are really feeling the nerf of Guardian Animals. Just that one mana change is like huge impact. It's like turn or two slower a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so it feels... Obviously, this is feels, right? But it feels like Druid's dead. It feels like a lot of these mid-range Druid decks are kind of dying out now that Guardian Animals got nerfed. And that feels really, really, really bad.
It wasn't just like Druid, like Spiteful Druid has seen a very small amount of people like giving it a shot and stuff. But yeah, that's all kind of gone now. Druid very much dead in Standard as well. So like the impact of that nerf is like very much felt across the different formats, and I think Wild kind of lost out a little bit of diversity from Druid.
For sure.
And a bit of a different, breath of fresh air kind of thing from a Druid list that historically has looked very, very similar, like has looked kind of the same across expansion. So a little bit of a bummer, given the card wasn't that oppressive in terms of Wild stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, sad to see it go, I guess, I suppose, for a Wild perspective.
Yeah, I meme all the time about Druid decks all start with the same 26 cards, and then you put whatever win con you want, right, for those last 4 cards.
Yeah.
And it felt like Guardian Animals finally allowed you to build decks in a different way. And
exactly. Yeah.
And now it's nerfed, and it's sad. And so how's the meta kind of shaken out, right? That's the big question. What's changed in the metagame since we've had nerfs? And I think to the surprise of nobody, Priest is still by far and away the best deck in the format. By a million miles. And Reno Priest has continued to be popular because Druid and Turtle Mage were two really, really poor matchups for that deck, and now they've gotten gutted, and so Priest counters are now a lot fewer. And because of this kind of, I don't want to say like surge in popularity, but because kind of a lack of other counters, you're seeing the rise of combo decks, right? So you're seeing a lot more Quest Mage, you're seeing a lot more Malagos Druid. And we'll talk a little bit about this new Tip the Scales OTK Paladin that's kind of popped onto the scene recently. But this has kind of come onto the scene in a big fashion because people want to be Priest because Priest is the most dominant deck. And so Quest Mage is still very good because aggro is now disappearing because Priest is super popular, and aggro just kind of sucks. If you're any sort of an aggro deck into Priest, good luck, buddy. Let's talk a little bit about this Tip the Scales OTK Paladin. Right, 9 eyebrows. Shout outs to him. Hit rank 1 legend with this kind of brand new take on the deck that uses Allura or Tip the Scales to kind of, or not Tip the Scales. What's the Prismatic Lens?
Prismatic Lens.
Yeah, that's the card. To cheat out really, really cheap Tip the Scales, and with just 7 Murlocs in the deck, those 7 Murlocs add up to be 30 damage exactly. So you can OTK as quickly as turn 4. It's kind of nutty. And so he hit rank 1 legend. A lot of people have been playing the second high legend. So I'm really interested to see kind of how it trickles down from there. But that's kind of like what the metagame feels like. And kind of the deck that's risen as like a counter to this has been Q-Block, I think. Just because Q-Block has a decent matchup into aggressive decks that exist and can beat Quest Mage and Tip the Scales Paladin because early taunts are OP. Right? And they kind of completely ruin the strategies of both of those decks. But Q-Block has this issue where it still just gets like absolutely farmed by Priest. So it's like a weird kind of issue that we're in the metagame.
For sure. Q-Block definitely as well, I think. some interest was sparked in the deck after Willow got the buff.
That's true.
That shouldn't go necessarily under the radar too much. Like people were kind of excited to try that. But yeah, Cubelock definitely filled some of that space. You know, you're talking about like Reno Priest counters, Reno Priest being the best deck, and with Turtle Mage and Druid, I don't think Druid was necessarily a hard counter, but it was definitely a matchup that I thought was pretty like close to 50-50. Like it was a comfortable matchup for the Druid, but the Pilgrim definitely, like the Turtle Mage definitely countered the Priest. And so that kind of like space has sort of been made available, and that's where something like these OTK Murloc Paladins have really come in recently, as those have kind of been refined and discovered and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the meta, it very much feels like we're talking about this space for the combo decks, and it very much feels like we're in a similar spot to where we were in several months ago.
Yeah.
This feels like the same kind of story, maybe with different names on the characters kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it was like the second half of Ashes of Outland, where it was all mage and some priest, and then like a couple of aggro decks or combo decks, right, that weren't super popular. And so yeah, like while these nerfs to guardian animals or turtle mage were probably good for the health of the standard format, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know much about that format. I haven't played it in a while. It really catapulted Wild back in time, which is kind of sad. And I think more than anything, yeah, Wild can be this place where like your decks should always be good, right? Or like still be playable rather. But it like Wild benefits just as much as other formats to new decks being present, right? Breath of fresh air, re-sparking interest. Like I've been losing to Quest Mage for what feels like a year now, and I've been losing to Reno Priest for what feels like 2.5 years now. Like I was excited for new decks to be a part of the metagame, and now we're going right back to this metagame. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't actually know like if the changes to Turtle or Jade Druid have actually kind of pushed that. I think that the meta's actually very much in the same kind of position that it was in before those nerfs, where it's in that same like Reno Priest versus combo versus like aggro kind of space. I think that maybe what's adding up is it's like the longer it happens, the more it kind of just feels like you're kind of going through the same thing again. And while some of the novelty also wears off from some of these decks, you kind of get used to the play pattern and how everything kind of feels in terms of like, if you queue into this, am I winning? Or like how Reno Priest can kind of necessarily warp the format. So I don't think it's actually too I don't think anything about the nerfs necessarily threw it back to where it was before the expansion, but I do think it's definitely like an ongoing feeling that a lot of people are having right now for sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Except with the minor caveat that Elucia is now a card.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I would argue with a little bit. Where like it just felt like. I mean, I'm talking specifically guardian animals. I felt like Jade Druid, when you have a wider variety of decks, I think that beat the top deck in the format. I feel like that leads to like much greater diversity because people have a choice to play decks, like, and it's a variety of strategies that I think are good against Priest, and so, and therefore people are more incentivized to pick them up because I can play this deck that I enjoy playing that beats the top deck, right? And therefore maybe there's less people playing Priest, and you have this like kind of trickle down effect in the metagame. But now that you've kind of had two of those decks that were, I know a lot of people love Turtle Mage, as like degenerate as the deck was sometimes, a lot of people love that deck. Right, and I honestly, like, I've never been a big fan of Druid, but I really, really enjoyed playing the new like proactive styles of Druid, and I don't know. I think for me, when you lower the choice that people have, and they're like stuck, okay, well now I have 3 decks if I want to beat Priest, right? I have Quest Mage, I have OTK Paladin, and I have Malekith Druid, and I don't know. So I disagree with you a little bit about that, but it also I completely agree with you on the fact that it feels like a lot of the games, because a lot of these decks have been refined at this point, and a lot of the strategies and game plans have been refined. It feels like, as people have learned to play the decks, which I think is a big thing, it feels like a lot of matchups are kind of decided without any turns actually taking place, right? And what I mean by that is most games are decided like, before you even take a mulligan. It depends on like what you've queued into. So like if you're playing aggro because you're trying to beat Quest Mages or OTK Paladins or whatever, and you queue into a Priest, that matchup is so bad, you almost have no chance at winning that game, right? And like no traditional control decks really have a chance of beating Priest, like absolutely none, right? You can't beat Priest and Quest Mage and Malagos Druid, right? You just can't beat those decks, and it feels like there's very little agency outside of what deck you're picking, right? I don't know if that's just personal, on how I feel about it, but it feels like there are very, very few decks where my decisions matter in game right now, because I'm either getting scammed by Priest, or I'm getting pole kelted on 4 and screamed on 7, or like it and those patterns, like, they happen almost all the time, right? Like every time you queue into Priest, they have like 6 or 7 AoE cards, right? And they're so consistent at hitting their combo. I don't know. Do you feel the same way about that?
So yeah, we're talking about kind of two things, I think, at the same time. We're talking about like how polarizing matchups are, and that can often be the feeling of like what you queue into is what you win or lose against, right? Like Quest Mage is one of the more polarizing decks I think that we've ever seen across like Standard and Wild, where it beats up on slow stuff and it folds very, very hard to the most aggressive decks. So that can feel kind of like the matchup being decided before it really happens. And then there's also like the draw RNG, right? Like how much like the game is dependent on what you draw into. And I think that's kind of like the other issue with Reno Priest, which doesn't actually tend to have that much in terms of like its matchups aren't that polarizing for the most part. Like it loses to the OTK stuff, but does pretty good against everything else. But like as an aggressive deck, when you're playing against Priest, it really does come down to like, did they draw the Reno Jackson a lot of the time? Or, like exactly like, did they draw Zephyrus or these like really important power spike cards? Did they hit Lash? I guess I'm kind of just naming cards at this point, and maybe that says more about how good Reno Priest is than whether it has like these weird power spikes and stuff. But yeah, it definitely feels like a frustrating time right now in the format, I think. Don't want to be too down on the show, don't want to be too down. Like everyone's here is interested in Wild, and don't want to turn into an entire rant kind of thing. But I think it's also important to be honest and realistic about what you're feeling about the format. And yeah, right now I'm definitely in a similar state. I think that the Tip the Scales Paladin coming onto the scene also doesn't help that a lot. Where
it's the new darkest
a lot of the
hour.
time Lightest Hour is the nickname that I've heard that I really liked actually. But yeah, with Prismatic Lens often being a exact 30 damage OTK, kind of cute the way that worked out, by the way. The Murlocs adding up to exactly 30. It's kind of funny, but yeah, with the Prismatic Lens kind of offering the OTK on turn 5 and stuff, it can be a little bit of a frustrating experience on ladder, I think, especially if you don't want to play, Reno Priest.
Yeah, like so we talked a couple episodes ago about like what we think a healthy metagame is, but like right now it feels like Priest is like so far above and beyond pretty much most other decks when it comes to power level, and it's countered by only a few specific decks or strategies in the metagame, and it just doesn't. I don't know. I agree with you. I don't want to be super down just because like I love Wild and I still like love playing Hearthstone, but it feels like right now it's just like Priest versus everything else, and if you're not playing Priest, you're putting yourself at a heavy disadvantage.
For sure. One thing I will say though, like we're at month 3 of the expansion.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like tired feeling of a particular format.
That's true. About all formats, right?
Yeah, like across Standard, it could be Battlegrounds, could be Wild, what we're talking about. This kind of like sort of getting over the sameness. If particular nerf didn't hit the right way, or a particular buff didn't hit the right way, or the expansion didn't bring a ton of new stuff, like I think for Wild specifically, what's really happened is that a lot of the early enjoyment that we kind of could have gotten out of the expansion was sort of taken a little bit away because of Darkglare, where Darkglare kind of presented this huge problem, right? Where Darkglare was like all consuming for the first kind of like 4 weeks of the expansion. And so it kind of ate into a lot of that new stuff. And so by the time like players kind of got over that, like that wasn't the most fun format, the most fun meta that we've been in. Now the fact that we're kind of back into this same old kind of routine with Reno Priest, I think that's also added on to some of the feeling of frustration. And so, like because the Wild isn't in necessarily the best place right now, in my opinion, like it's not the best format it's ever had really. That kind of like frustration and those kind of feelings have kind of added up. And, you know, like the third month of the expansion is very normal for people to take breaks. Like I'm personally taking a break right now from Wild.
Yeah.
I just said that at the time of recording. I said this at the start of the day, like before we started recording. Just because, yeah, I'm a little bit over the format. I'm not enjoying it that much, but I'm still happy to talk about it and kind of get into all that today. Yeah, just dancing around all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, don't get us wrong. Like Skullman's Academy was a great expansion, I think.
Yeah,
very few people would argue against that.
Yep.
It's just like we're hitting that point where like we're like a month away from card reveals, right, and review season and everything like that, and we still haven't had this new mode announced yet, and we don't know when it's coming. It's like we're a little bit in that peak, and I think that combined with the fact that we are in a metagame that feels the exact same as a metagame, you know, from 4 or 5 months ago, has a lot of people. It's not just us, right? Like I know it sounds like we're just complaining. It's not just us. A lot of people are saying the same thing. And so yeah, I mean that's just the metagame. Like it sounds like we're complaining, but it's Priest versus everyone else. That's what it is.
It kind of reminds me of like always complaining about the next generation.
Yeah.
Like every generation says that their kids are the laziest. It's like every expansion is always like really bad and the worst, but is it really?
It's
or
not.
are we just kind of sick of it? Yeah, like I think part of it is like I'm definitely frustrated with the format right now for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like in a month from now, am I going to look back and say was it that bad? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah, I mean I'll say
despite the fact that Reno Priest isn't, you know, I am frustrated with it, but is it really as bad? I don't know. But I'm taking a break right now, and I do have my current issues.
I mean, I will say like this is not the worst metagame we've ever been in, right? Like we're talking about this. This is not Darkest Hour metagame. This isn't Snip Snap Warlock, right? Like this is not the worst metagame. It's just like it's the same metagame. And it's like it's something that I personally don't enjoy. Like I don't enjoy playing against Priest and Quest Mage for 60% of my games. Like it's just not what I personally enjoy. So I don't.
Yeah. I
mean that's at High Legend, right? I don't know what the meta is like elsewhere, but for me personally, it's a little bit weird. I'm lucky I found a deck that I do enjoy playing. Like I've been addicted to Pocket Galaxy Reno Mage for the past like week and a half. It's like I have a saving grace, like, and I enjoy playing this game still. And so like we usually kind of transitioning away from us complaining about the metagame. We usually talk about kind of tech cards or under the radar decks, you know, towards the end of these meta sections. And there aren't really too many tech cards, right? There's like your bits and pieces like countering Reno Priest, like some people are running Finley and Grizzle Wizard, Beneath the Grounds and Odd Rogue. You've got your traditional things that we've talked about in previous episodes. What I want to talk about is, so we had a bunch of cards that got buffed, right, at rotation time. One of the biggest culprits being, you know, Raza. And so while the buff to Raza might not have been like a huge hit, a lot of the other buffs I think were, right? Spiteful, Yogg, etc. So what I really want, okay, is I really want you to buff Albatross, Blizzard. You hear me? I know you've heard us for all these nerfs before, but I want you to buff Albatross. Like, if you buff Albatross, like, it'll solve the issue of Reno Priest, because then you can shove Albatross in all your aggro decks and not feel bad about it, and it'll be okay, right? And then you can leave Raza at 0.
So yeah, on the whole, like, it's touching all the buffs and stuff. We did see a lot of stuff like at the rotation. We had things like, you know, Spiteful Summoner. We had Yogg reverted. We also had stuff like Raiding Party and Dr. Boom. And I think, like, on the whole, I'd say they've probably been pretty successful in terms of opening up sort of some new stuff in Wild, or giving slight boost to decks that, you know, kind of needed it in Wild. Like things like the Emerald Spellstone in Hunter, I think has definitely not been, you know, overwhelming. You know, it's Hunter, right? It doesn't exactly warp the game in the way kind of that Raza has. But I think, like, overall, they've been pretty successful. Even something like Raiding Party, I think. Do you think, like, people would be too upset about the Raiding Party buff? Like, I feel like that was such a big success, going from 4 mana and reverting it back down to 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of their buffs except for the Raws were like huge successes, right? And it's just like that Boomsday event that they had where they buffed 18 cards, right? And I think there was like 2 of them
3,
that were
right?
issues.
Yeah, it was like Galaxy, Extra Arms, and I feel like there was one other. But
those are the only 2 that I could think of. Like there was 2 issues out of all of those cards. But other than that, those I think were a huge success. Like Crystology, we got Crystology from that event. That's nutty. And I think a lot of the buffs hit home with a lot of people. Like I love the Yogg on Nerf, right, for Wild. I think the Raiding Party single-handedly brought Kingsbane back into the metagame. I think Spiteful Druid never really had a chance to succeed in Wild because they nerfed it to 7 before it even really took off, right? And it being
Sludge Slurper from
Sludge
one
Slurper
attack
being back.
two.
Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
a huge amount of like of the buffs were like insanely good, and I think very well done. We just keep hyping on this Raza because it took an already good deck and made it like absolutely fucking busted, but that's just us. But I think it's important to note, like, while they missed on the Raza and while they missed on like the Pocket Galaxy buff, all of the other changes that they've done have been very, very good. And so I would love to see them keep doing stuff like buffing like these events, or like buffing at rotation. And so I guess I posed the question I talked about Albatross. I want Albatross potentially being buffed again. I'd like to see like the Galakron Shaman cards be buffed when they get rotated, because I think that was something that was successful in Wild, and I'd love to see if it actually, could be a thing in our format. And I'd love to see Serenite Chain Gang. Give me back my Chain Gang for Shudderwalk Shamans. Like, I don't know why they didn't unnerf that card. I'm so sad at that.
Yeah, I think like I definitely agree. Like, overall, it was a big success. But in the same way that the buffing and standard event was a big success, like, I think it's great. Please do more of it. I love it. Just change it when things go wrong. Like, don't be afraid to kind of do this thing, because I think a lot of players love it.
Yeah.
But as long as you're kind of like active, in because like buffing is risky, dude. Like, buffing is so hard to get right, where you want to try and push something into being playable, and not pushing it in a way that's kind of dangerous is so scary.
Yeah.
But kind of like noticing when things have been overstepped and stepping in when you need to is super important. So if they just did that, the Raza, I think, like, overall, I would say it's a big success. In the same way that Galaxy going back to 7, Extra Arms back to 3, made the whole buffing event in standard like a really big deal and a really good thing. So yeah, I just hope we see more of it, as long as it's like kind of actively handled.
Yeah. But yeah, you guys in the comments, let us know down below how you guys feel about the metagame and what cards you might like to see buffed moving forward, whether it's in a new event or at rotation. I know I'm a little bit biased towards some cards, but if you guys have some that you'd like, unnerfed, let us know in the comments below. So yeah, with that, let's move on to part 2. So a year and a half ago, Ixar made this original tweet where it felt like a lot of Hearthstone personalities had kind of moved away from the game, and he asked, well, if it used to be your main game mode, what would bring you back? And a lot of the changes that people brought up in the comments have sort of been implemented, right? Like, new game modes brought about battlegrounds, right? And things like that. So Ixar, I think this week, tweeted out the same thing. Where if Hearthstone used to be your main game mode and isn't anymore, what would get you back? And I know both of us still mainly play Hearthstone, so this isn't totally geared towards us, but I wanted to use this as like a jumping off point of, what would you like to see added to Hearthstone in the future that would get you, more excited to play Hearthstone, I guess I should say, instead of bringing you back. What would keep you interested and like make you want to play more than you already do?
Yeah, I think this is such a good question, and the replies were fantastic as well. I went back and actually read through a lot of the replies from that very first tweet that Ixar made like a year and a half ago, and then I read a lot of the replies from the current tweet, and yeah, he got like such awesome feedback from a lot of like well thought out and intelligent people. I think like the majority of people who are often very good at the game, or take like an interest in like that kind of design aspect. There's a lot of stuff that you can tap into there, right? There's often a lot of smart people giving good answers about this kind of thing, especially when they're interested in game design. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. We saw something from Dog, where Dog talked about how he wanted a mode where there was kind of a bunch of different sets that were popping in like in and out monthly. Kind of like a more active standard sort of thing. I don't know what like a Magic equivalent would be for calling that format, if there is one.
I think he's like equating it. There was an arena mode. Like, part of the reason I jumped into arena for a little bit was because
for sure
they had like four standard sets and they had 4 wild sets, but it was like 4 completely random wild sets that weren't at the same rotation, and so you got a bunch of like new synergies and you like maybe not archetypes, but like unbefore seen synergies, because they weren't in standard at the same time or aren't necessarily strong enough for wild. And I think that's more what he's talking about, where you have, so like basically you'll have Ashes of Outland, Skull Immense Academy, and then like 2 or 3 wild sets,
Angora.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just see how the metagame plays out, which I think would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that'd be really fun. That's like definitely the game mode that I've been like that exact thing. Like the arena style of sets is something that I've been asking for or have been kind of wanting for a long time. I don't know if asking for is right, but yeah, it's something that like would be on my Hearthstone wish list.
Yeah.
Because a big part of like Wild, why I like it is how you do have like these old synergies and also how relatively unsolved everything can be sometimes. Because the player base is smaller, often you can kind of like be the person that discovers these like new decks and things. You can push them personally. As like a player, that's something that I really find appealing. And I think in a rotating kind of like in a like a format with these constantly moving sets, I think that kind of that feeling of freshness, that new kind of possibilities that you can go down. I think that would be really, really fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, be really cool to see something like that.
Yeah, part of the whole reason that Wild appeals to me is like, yeah, you have this like insane amount like synergies that you can play with and power level that you can play with, which is, I enjoy that. But like the big thing that drew me to the format originally was like the deck building possibilities and like being rewarded for like finding those synergies and strategies that nobody else has. And I think in a rotating format like this, where like every 2 months you change out what wild formats are or wild sets are in the format, right, and completely shake things up, which would be awesome. And it would also solve a lot of the issues that people have with like, standards getting stale, right, like a month and a half, 2 months in. Well, if you have this like 2-month rotating thing, then you kind of solve that issue. I think another big thing that I would like to see is like, yeah, tournament mode's not a thing, right, but they just recently had like the heroic Brawliseum, right, the heroic Tavern Brawl, but they have had like non-heroic Brawliseums, right, where like it's 150 gold to enter, just like arena, with like arena-esque prizes. And I would love to see something like that just be a permanent mode, right, as like the solution to tournament mode, right, just give some people incentive to play like constructed with different stakes than just ladder. I think is because I feel like a lot of the outcry that you get on Twitter and in Reddit is like from people that are like super competitive, that have been playing the game for a ton, that are like getting burnt out on the game, right? And just giving people more ways to play the cards, I think is a big deal. And so I would just love something like the Brawliseum to just be another thing under the modes section of Hearthstone, another way to play the game.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's so like super important as well, what you said about the players who are like most dedicated to you, like the ladder grinders and stuff. Like looking after them and kind of giving them a little bit of variety, I think is something that's super important and can often like lead to far greater player retention. But I don't know, I'm not a game developer, so this is just like my guesswork, my general thoughts. But yeah, I think Brawliseum as a permanent mode would be great in like one of the, what do you call it? Like this little game mode things.
Yeah, whatever it's called for BGs. And
the little arena and brawl battlegrounds, wherever that thing is. Yeah.
And I think the last big thing from like a game design perspective, I think would be like, I mean, obviously we're Wild players. I want to see more Wild support, right? Like, I don't know what happened to the Wild Open. Maybe not worth the advertising or the prize money, but I mean, even if it's just like local tournaments or whatever, I would love to see more stuff for Wild at some point. I don't know. Maybe there needs to be more creativity when it comes to Wild, right? Because like there's almost no way we're getting a GM league for Wild, or maybe the Wild Open is kind of scrapped forever. So like, what would be some unique ways to promote Wild? I don't really know.
Yeah, the Wild Open, I honestly imagine like like it feels bad to kind of say this, but you could lower the prize pool by a lot to make it very friendly, I think, from Blizzard's side.
And you would still get so much interest, I think.
It still drew a lot of interest, I think, from, or at least a lot of hype from a lot of the Wild players. Like, I'm not saying in an ideal world. In an ideal world, of course, you keep the prize pool about where it was, which was, I think about like a healthy like 30, 40K, like for the total for like top 8 or so. I think
the first place got 10K. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like great, right? For like a one-off tournament. Yeah. That's fantastic. But yeah, like what you're saying, be realistic. We're not getting, I don't think, Wild GM, like it makes a lot of sense for Blizzard to have one format that they're really focused on. as the standard format. Totally makes sense from their side of things, right? We're not going crazy here and demanding wild GMs, but I think that some support what you're saying, like something would be great, because the fact that we didn't get the wild open this year, the last one we got was in 2019, which is like we're bored. Have we crossed 18 months?
Yeah, it was at the very beginning of 2019.
Yeah, we're over 18 months now since like any wild competitive thing was done outside of Blizzard, and so there have been some really fun like community-driven events. Team One Trick, they used to hold them that were great. The Solemn was able to fund and put on his tournament, which was really, really fun. Had over like 600 participants, I think, across NA and EU. So that was really, really fun as well. And yeah, it'd be great if we got something like that. Or even if Wild was even incorporated into GM. I think like GM as a whole is something that Blizzard will probably be looking at. Because, you know, again, they've gotten a lot of feedback. Even Ixar on this tweet has gotten a lot of feedback. And there have been sort of a few players that haven't necessarily been fully fulfilled, even as playing as GMs. So I think there'll be some changes down the road, but it just might be the case where they're just not ready to announce things, right? Like these things take time.
Yeah, obviously.
We're still waiting on the game mode.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I think one of the easiest things to do, like just referencing Magic for a second here. So like they're having their grand finals, world championship, whatever this weekend. Whatever, I don't remember what it's called because they've changed it like 17 times. But so like they're playing all online, and so like normally you do like their standard format, and then they have like draft, right? Limited. So like our equivalent of arena. As like a competitive part of their GM. And what I would love to see is like, yeah, standard is important. It's your main game mode, but I would love to do things like, so like I think in standard they have like a conquest, the last hero standing, couple of weeks, and I would love to see like, okay, well you have standard conquest, standard last hero standing, but then you have like wild for 1 week, and then some sort of like, if you do this like rotating format mix between standard and wild, have that be part of your competitive, right? Have that be part of your competitive structure so that people are incentivized to play all of the formats. And I think that'd get a lot more people excited in the format and playing the format, which I think is a big deal. And I don't really know why they haven't done that, and it feels kind of bad, right? Kind of, it's
like a bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, a big missed opportunity, I feel like.
Yeah, but again, like the saying, we don't know necessarily everything that's happening behind the scenes.
True.
We'll see. On everything they do have announced. But yeah, I definitely agree. Like it'd be great. It'd be great if we got to see like a wild week in GM. Dude, can you imagine like all the GMs playing wild for a couple of weeks? Like that'd be fantastic. I'd be super down.
I mean, I think the best part,
I mean, they get a lot of interest when they do it. There was like Fino was playing wild for a couple of weeks there at the end of last expansion, and it was great. Like there were so many wild people, and he still maintained like a decent, I think, viewership from his perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of interest, and it'd be kind of fun.
I mean, I think the best part about the Wild Open month was like obviously competing, but also seeing all these GMs playing Wild and all this interest in Wild, and like people figuring out like what's broken, like synergies that like we've played Wild for 4 years now, and you see these GMs come in and be like, I like this card better, and it performs better, and you're just like, okay, yeah, duh, that's why you're a GM. And that was like some of the best part about like watching streams during that month. Was amazing, and I loved it. And you're kind of missing that now. But yeah, I mean, from a gameplay perspective, I guess I do want to touch on this whole fact of like Sork Apprentice and Canrithad and Raiden Elemental and like the Mech Warper effect cards. Still think that those should be nerfed, but that's just me harping on the same things. But you know, zero mana is broken, and that's something I'd like to see changed. But I know we've talked about that a lot, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But I think I'm just really waiting for this new mode to be announced, whatever it is, whenever it's announced. I'm really
it definitely like we were saying earlier. You know, this is the limbo month, right? This is the like we're stuck between the first 2 months of the expansion, all the hype, and next month we're getting like the new set will be, you know, starting to trickle down, all the reveals. We're also waiting on this game mode, so we're just kind of in this limbo where we're just kind of hanging out with Reno Priest, and you know, it's we've had better acquaintances than Reno Priest, I think. So we'll see how things you know, play out from here.
Yeah, but I just want to end this section with like last time Ixar did this tweet, got a lot of good feedback, and the game made a lot of changes for the better, right? And some of it was like like a lot of the comments that he got on that original tweet were stuff that was implemented, and I don't know if it was like based upon feedback he got from that tweet or the stuff that they already had in the works. But I mean, I will say Hearthstone has been doing great with the changes that it's made, right? As much as we complain and
I
stuff,
think
but
I think Hearthstone, like, I think the team as a whole has like crushed it.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
For the better part of a year, like 100% from where we were. I think at around 2017, around the Witchwood era, like Witchwood through Rusticon. It felt like the game was a little bit rudderless. Like we weren't really sure what was going on, like what we were pushing towards, or like there's such a lack of change a lot of time. And I think that over the past year, we've seen so much good stuff in terms of like they're changing in balancing philosophy. You know, like they're so much more frequent now with the changes, and I think it's fantastic. Like we got a new class, we got battlegrounds. I think the card design as a whole has been like a lot better. I think the recent set Scholomance is one of, if not probably the best expansion that they've done. I know some people have issues with it in terms of the random generation, but I don't think random generation by itself is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's more like the type of generation, right? Like the less extremely wide the outcomes are. If you keep regeneration sort of like a more narrow thing where actual decision making is being made, which is kind of why I like Discover over like get a random card, right? Like with Discover, you're often making more of a choice than get a random card. But that's an example. Like overall, I think Hearthstone team has been crushing it. Right now, we're kind of in a lull, but there's a lot of good replies in that tweet that Ixar put out 18 months ago, and there's a lot of really good replies that on the tweet that he's just like put out this week. So we'll see. I really like the game where it is right now, and yeah, it's kind of like looking forward to everything.
Yeah, excited to see what the future brings. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so with that, let's move on to part 3. All right, so part 3. So here's where we talk about our 3 decks of the week. And so we've kind of been mixing it up with meta and off meta. And we talked a little bit about this Murloc Paladin a lot during the first segment of our stream. We talked about this Anyfin, OTK, Tip the Scales, Paladin. So for those of you guys that aren't exactly sure what this deck does, is you've got Allura, High Abyss Allura. So this is a Priest and Paladin dual class card. And you've got Wand Maker to make a couple of cheap spells. Or you have the coin if you're going second. And so then via High Abyss Allura or Prismatic Lens, you're going to get a really cheap copy or free copy of Tip the Scales. And so Tip the Scales is going to pull all these Murlocs from your deck, and you only have 7 in your deck. So if you hit it off of Prismatic Lens, you're going to get all 7. And so you have 2 Grimskill Oracles, 2 Bluegill Warriors, 2 Murloc War Leaders, and then Old Murk-Guy. Okay, and all of that damage added up equals 30 exact OTK one shot. Beautiful. It's not exacties if you have Allura, because obviously Allura takes up a board slot, but if they are able to deal with the Tip the Scales, for example, if you needed to play it to recover board against other aggressive decks, or you have happened to draw a couple of your Murlocs, you obviously have 2 copies of Anything Can Happen in your deck as well. So whether you get those discounted or not, so that you can finish them off with 30 damage waves off of Anyfin. So this is kind of the new deck that's popped up. I think originally from Nine Eyebrows. I want to make sure we're giving him some credit.
Yeah, he originally cited Maxi as well. Not sure on the full name, but yeah.
Yeah, so Maxi, Nine Eyebrows, Concerned Mom have all been kind of piloting this deck. And it's kind of taken over High Legend Ladder. I've seen a lot of it, like a ton of this deck. And I think the big plus to this deck is it's decent into aggressive strategies like Odd Paladin. So aggressive strategies that are not like hyper aggro, right? So it struggles a little bit against aggro druid, but the big plus is that it destroys priest, like absolutely destroys priest. There is very little, I don't want to say nothing, there's very little Reno priest can do to kind of disrupt this combo. So yeah, I mean, I think this deck is here to stay. It's kind of annoying because turn 4, turn 5 OTKs are never fun, right? That's kind of why everybody hated Darkest Hour, because games were decided on turn 4, turn 5. I will say this has a little bit more counterplay than Darkest Hour, but that doesn't mean it's healthier for the format. So, but yeah, Lightest Hour.
It's definitely, yeah, Lightest Hour. Yeah, this deck's interesting, right? Like how it's kind of popped up.
Yeah.
And it is using a lot of like new cards that have kind of like altered things a lot, right? Where it's got the Polkel, the Allura, the Broomstick, Wand Maker, Barov. like just in case anyone was wondering, like where the hell was this deck like before the expansion came out? So it got a lot of like really nice stuff for the defensive side of things. Like Broomstick is a really big inclusion, I think. Dude, I feel like every deck we're just like, oh, Broomstick, Penflinger, or Polkout, and sometimes more than just the one.
Or all three of them together, you know?
Or all three of them together, yeah. But yeah, the hell of a set. But yeah, this deck kind of threw me off when I first saw it because of the anythins. I was like, oh, don't I just not want anything because then I can't high roll people as consistently? But no, I think you want at least one. I'm not entirely sold on two, but not sure. But yeah, this deck is really, really good. Often the high roll is just playing Noz out. Like often Noz is your high roll because you just play it on 4 and then next turn you just play tip for 8. Like you don't even need to go through like any of the jumping the rings with Prismatic or Allura. But yeah, deck can definitely be countered. I think like Flame Ward in particular is a really good counter. Or as a way to kind of like push back on it. And you can also like transform the Murlocs if they draw them, like so with things like devolving missiles or stuff like that. But yeah, new kid on the block, OTK, Murloc, Lightest Hour, Paladin. Yeah, we'll see where it goes from here. It's so hard to figure out exactly how good a deck is when it's so extreme in its high roll, right? Like sometimes you die to this deck on like turn 5. And like the more high roller your deck is, I feel like it's harder to get an actual grasp of like just how good something is on average. It's like when Darkest Hour came out. I had no idea what the Darkest Hour was like the greatest thing that had ever been put in Hearthstone, or it was like a cheap sort of giga high roll nonsense thing.
Yeah. I will say it reminds me a lot of Darkest Hour. I will say that.
It gives a very similar vibe, in my opinion.
Where like you can play the slow game if you need to, right? And like the deck's fine if you play a slow game, but you don't want to play a slow game because you can do the Giga Nuts on turn 4, turn 5, and when you do, like there's almost zero counterplay from your opponent. It's kind of disgusting. And I will say, like, when I initially saw this deck, I was like, this beats Priest and nothing else. But then with the Broomsticks and then Explosive Sheep and Barov, like, you actually have a disgusting amount of like game against stuff like Odd Paladin and Odd Rogue. Like, you actually are pretty damn good into those decks, which is kind of scary. But I will say, keep an eye on this deck because decks like this, like, tend to get a lot of polarizing reaction, I think, from the community, right? Where people either absolutely despise losing to this deck and absolutely hate it, even if it's not a good deck.
Or they're playing it,
right? And I will say, like, it's kind of hard to evaluate this deck because, like, it is brand new. I do want to see kind of how its matchups, like the matchup spread ends up being after a couple weeks to see if is it actually just like a one trick I can beat Priest with this deck, or is it actually like it holds its own, it's a good deck, right? Moving on to deck number 2. We talked a lot about this deck that's top dog in the format, and so we felt like we were a little bit obligated to at least show you what the best version of that deck is. And so this is the Reno Priest list. I think Corbett and I were talking a little bit earlier how it's like 29 out of the cards feel very core to this list. There's not many more flex spots left in this deck just because as the deck's been refined, stuff like Penflinger has been proven to be really, really good in the deck, even though initially might have been thought of being a little bit overkill or whatnot. But yeah, Polkout, Elucia, Penflinger, Raised Dead, I think were the only additions to this deck. I say only, that's four new additions to this deck, but it is a very, very, very strong deck.
Basically the figured out list. I would say the main flex spot, like Renew, is the card that people have been cutting here and there. I believe Hijo was playing Panthera, the 2-mana 2/3 if you use your hero power, draw a card.
Yeah.
There's also Sphere, sometimes makes it into lists, not that popular, but yeah, sometimes Sphere. People have looked to cut Renew, people have also looked to cut Loot Hoarder, but overall this is like very solidified, which is strange sometimes, right? In Wild, it's weird to get a list that kind of gets accepted, especially Reno deck. Like Reno decks are historically just so varied, where like they can often be as much as like 7 or 8 cards different, very, very easily. But yeah, Reno Priest very much feels like it's been figured out, sold. All right, this is what we're going with. There was some weirdness where people were trying things like Psychic Conjurer. I think that's gone away at this point, I hope. But yeah, Reno Priest is kind of it. So yeah, look at like the Renew, and maybe even like the Loot Hoarder as the main flex cards if you want to run like a Glut Ooze down the road at some point, or you want to run Sphere, or you want to run the Panthera. But yeah, this is pretty much it, like the 29 whatever core. And maybe if Reno Priest gets obscenely popular, like even beyond where it is, then we can talk about like Thought Steel and Lazul. But yeah, I'd just be rocking this. And I think like the vast majority of players really are. Like this core is really caught on. Particularly at High Legend, I suppose.
All right. And then last but not least, let's talk about our off meta deck. And it kind of feels weird talking about this as an off meta deck because it hit rank 1 legend. But I know a lot of you guys love you some Dead Man's Hand Warrior. And so make sure you guys go follow this man Adrian on Twitter because he hit rank 1 legend with this deck. And I mean it looks like a good Dead Man's Hand Warrior list.
Yeah, this list is really clean to me. I like it a lot. The only like cards that are kind of really up to debate, I think, are like the Prime and the Brawl. And arguably like the Forge of Souls Bulwark package. But I think Forge Bulwark is pretty good. Brawl I certainly understand. Prime I certainly understand. Like I think overall this is a very clean list. It's not running as much tech heavy stuff. It's not running the like grizzled Finley package. It's it is running the double rat, right? So that's like noteworthy as well. So that can be cut maybe if you're running into less combo-y stuff, and sorry, if you're running into like, so you cut it if you're running into less combo-y stuff and maybe seeing more, I don't know, like aggro arena priest or something. But yeah, this is really, really good. I think for what it is. So do I think DMH is top tier? No, but I think it's definitely viable. Like I think there's a lot of decks on ladder that have the potential to hit rank 1 that players can climb with. If they happen to play them well and hit the right matchups and all that kind of stuff. Like we said, the meta does feel relatively matchup dependent. So if you have a good run and search of favorables, then you can do well. Not saying this happened to Adrian. I'm sure he did great to hit rank 1 legend with this DMH list. But yeah, DMH, big favorite for a lot of players. It seems to be like the archetype that has is this the archetype that has like the stronger support base relative to its like population on ladder and stuff? Like I feel like DMH, the diehard supporters of DMH, really kind of are very, very vocal.
If we're talking about relative percentages, yeah, I would argue that, right?
It's this on Milrogue, right? I feel like Milrogue also gives it a run for its money. 7 guys on Milrogue.
Do Milrogue players have their own Discord server? Like that's the real question.
Well, there's only about 7 of them, but I see them on Reddit all the time. So, I mean, they're working around the clock on that, I think.
That's true. But congrats, Adrian, for hitting rank 1 legend with this deck. And if you guys are looking for a good Dead Man's Hand Warrior list, this is definitely the one in that deck. But yeah, that'll be it for us tonight, guys. We'll be doing these episodes every Sunday with news and decks every week. And just a reminder that we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all your podcast distributors now. So if you would like to listen to us on the go, make sure you guys check us out there and make sure you share with your friends. Corbett, thank you again for joining me, friend. I'll let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can find me not streaming this week at CorbettGames at Twitch TV. And you can also find me on Twitter, same handle, CorbettGames. So yeah, come check it out soonish, I guess. But yeah, thanks for checking out the show. Hope you have a good one, guys.
Well, does this mean if you're not streaming that we'll finally get some Corbett YouTube content?
No. Let's make that firmly. Yeah. No, okay. Not yet.
I tried.
Soon.
I tried. All right, I tried for you guys.
Tried to sell that for me. Couldn't do it. It was close.
But yeah, we appreciate you guys watching. We hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time. Later.
Bye, guys.